The first thing Cedar Bow did when I rode back in after 10 years was go quiet. Men I had never met stepped off the boardwalk to let my horse pass, and a fellow outside the feed store put his hand flat on his boy's chest and walked him backward into the doorway, the way you'd back a child away from a snake coiled in the grass. I had spent a long while becoming the kind of man folks did that for, and I would have told you, right up until that afternoon, that it had not cost me a single thing. Then I saw her in the door of the mercantile with a sack of flour balanced on her hip, and 10 years went out of me all at once, like air out of a man who has been hit low and hard. Marin Tawley. She had a strand of hair come loose at her temple and a set to her jaw I remembered better than I remembered my own mother's face, and she looked at me across that dusty street the way you'd look at a debt you had given up ever collecting. She did not drop the flour. She did not so much as shift her weight. She just looked, and then she turned and went back inside, and the bell over the door gave one small sound, and that was all the welcome the town of Cedar Bow saw fit to give Sela's care. I sat my horse a moment in the middle of the road. I had practiced this ride 1,000 times on 1,000 cold trails. In none of those nights had I worked out what a man was supposed to do once he had finally come. I will tell it plain, because I have learned that plain is the only honest way for a man like me to talk. 10 years before that afternoon, I was 22 and so full of myself I could hardly fit through a doorway. I was going to marry Marin Tawley. Everybody in that valley knew it. We had known it ourselves since we were children running barefoot down by Hatch Creek. Since the summer she set my broken finger straight with a willow splint and told me to quit my hollering. Her father, Asa Tawley, ran the Larkspur, the best horse ground in the Cedar Bow country, and I worked it alongside my younger brother Tom, and the plan was that I would marry Marin and we would all of us hold that land together until we were old. But I had a temper in those days and I had pride enough for 3 men, and one evening Asa Tawley said a true thing to me that I did not want to hear. He said I rode like I had something to prove, and a man who has something to prove will get good men killed. He said it gentle, the way you say a hard thing to a son. And I, being young and stupid and stung, threw down my hat and saddled my horse and rode out into the dark to cool off, telling myself I would be back by morning and he would be the one to apologize. That night the storm came down off the ribbons the way storms there do, all at once and from everywhere. Hatch Creek, which had been a thing you could step across, came up the banks like a living animal. The old beaver dam above the north pasture let go. Asa went out into it because the brood mares were trapped against the wire, and Tom, my Tom, who was 19 and followed me the way a colt follows a lead horse, Tom went out after Asa because that is the kind of boy he was. I was 11 miles off, sulking under a dry overhang, warm and dry and angry, while the water took them both. They found Asa downstream the next day. They found Tom 3 days after that. I did not go to either burying. I told myself I could not stand the grief, but the truth is uglier than that. The truth is I could not stand to see Marin's face and know that if I had been where I was supposed to be, where a man stays, I might have pulled them out. I might have been the one in the water instead. So I did the cowardly thing dressed up as the brave one. I rode out of Cedar Bow and I did not stop, and over 10 years I made of myself a hard, fast, useful man, a trail boss who could move 2,000 head through bad country without losing a steer, a man who broke the horses other men gave up on, a man whose name went ahead of him so that he never had to explain himself to anybody. I told myself I was done with that valley. I was lying to myself the whole 10 years. A man can ride a long way on a lie. He just cannot ride home on one. What finally turned me around was a small thing. I was wintering a horse string near 2 forks and I shared a fire with a cattle buyer who, not knowing my history, got to telling about the Cedar Bow country and how a big outfit was buying up the whole valley, water rights and all, and how there was only one place still holding out, a horse ranch called the Larkspur, run by a widow woman alone, except she wasn't a widow. The man had it wrong. She had never married. A woman alone, he said, with 2 little ones to feed and the big outfit squeezing her water down to a trickle, and how it was only a matter of time. I did not sleep that night. By morning I had my string sold and my face pointed west, and I told myself I was only going to look, only going to see that she was all right, and then I would ride on and trouble no one. That was the last lie I told myself before the true one started coming due. So there I sat in the road, and the mercantile bell still ringing in my ears. An old Hetty Coyle came out onto her porch wiping her hands on her apron, and looked me up and down the way she'd done when I was a boy stealing peppermints. "Well," she said, "look what the river finally spit back. Hetty, you here to make trouble or fix some?" She had never in her life softened a question for anybody. I heard the larkspurs in a hard way. You heard right. Augustus Vanes bought every drop of water above her place and means to have the rest. Run off near 40 head of her stock this spring, though you'll never prove who. She squinted at me. She doesn't need a hard man riding in to play hero, Silas. She's harder than you by half, and she's done it 10 years without you. You remember that before you go out there with your big reputation and break what little is left to break. I touched my hat to her and turned the horse and rode out the south road toward the Larkspur, and every mile of it was a mile I had ridden 1,000 times in my sleep, and every mile of it I felt sicker. The Larkspur sat where it had always sat in the green elbow of the valley under the ribbons, the long horse barn and the low house and the round breaking corral. But it had got smaller and it had got tireder. The fences wanted mending. The big upper ditch that used to run full and singing all summer was down to a brown thread you could near jump across, and I knew without being told that was Vane's doing, somewhere up above. A headgate cranked down on a woman who couldn't fight a man with that much money behind him. She was in the breaking corral when I rode up, working a green colt on a long line, and she did not stop. The colt was a good one, a leggy bay full of fire and bad opinions, and she handled him with a quietness that was its own kind of authority. There was a boy of about 10 on the top rail, watching with his whole body, and a little girl maybe 6 sitting in the dirt by the gate making a corral of her own out of twigs and pebbles, and both of them went still and wary the way the town had, looking at the stranger. I got down. I stood at the rail with my hat in my hands like a man at a graveside. "Marin, you can water your horse at the trough," she said, not looking at me working the colt. "Then you can go. I heard about Vane." Everybody's heard about Vane. She brought the colt down to a walk, then a stop, and rubbed him between the eyes, and only then did she turn and look at me, and her eyes were dry and steady and they cut clean through. "What is it you think you're doing here, Silas?" "I don't rightly know," I said, because it was the truth and I was done with anything else. "I heard you were alone out here with the children and a fight you couldn't win and I couldn't stay away. I'm not asking for anything. I'd just like to be useful. Then I'll go." Useful? She said it like a word in a language she'd forgotten. The boy on the rail was watching us both now, looking from one face to the other, trying to read the country between us. "You want to be useful. 10 years too late to be useful, and you ride in now." "I know it." "Do you?" She wound the line. "My father's buried up on that knoll. Your brother's beside him. You never came. Not for them, not for me. I wrote you twice the first 2 years before I knew better. Sent the letters to every cow town anybody said your name in. You never answered." I had got those letters. I had carried one of them, unopened, in my saddlebag for 4 years because I could not stand to open it and could not stand to throw it away until the seam wore through and the paper came to pieces. I did not tell her that then. It was not a thing to use to soften her. I only said, "There's no answer to that you'd want to hear." She looked at me a long moment. Then she looked at the brown thread of the ditch, and at the tired fences, and at the 2 children, and I watched her do the arithmetic that a woman alone with everything on her shoulders does 100 times a day, the arithmetic of pride against need. I had no business hopping. I hoped anyway. The colts have to be ready for the army buyer in 6 weeks, she said at last, flat as a board. There's 20 head Greenbroke and another dozen I haven't had time to start. I've got fenced down on the whole north line and one man who comes when he can, which isn't often because Vane pays better than I do and folks have to eat. She wound the last of the line and hung it on the post. You can sleep in the barn. You can eat what we eat. You'll take no wage because I haven't got one, and the day you raise your reputation at Augustus Vane like a gun, you're gone, because I will not have my children grow up in the middle of a killing. Are we clear? We're clear. Then quit standing there like a fence post, she said, and go look at the bays off hind. He's favoring it and I can't find why. That was how I came home, not with open arms and forgiveness, with a lame colt and a list of fence and a woman watching to see if I'd run again. The boy's name was Wheeze and the girl's was June, and they were Marin's sister Etta's children. Etta and her husband had both gone in the lung fever 2 winters past, down in the lower settlements, and Marin had hitched a wagon and driven 3 days each way to fetch the children home, and had been mother to them ever since without one word of complaint that I ever heard. Wheeze was old enough to remember his own folks and to carry a quiet, watchful grief that I knew the shape of better than he could have guessed. June had been so small she remembered nothing, and she had decided in her own small council that the world was a friendly place and went about proving it daily. It was June who came around first, of course. The young ones always do. The second morning, she planted herself in the barn doorway while I was forking hay and informed me that I was very tall and that her aunt said I used to live here a long time ago when she wasn't born yet. And was that true? And did I know that the gray mare's name was Biscuit, and that Biscuit was the best one and the rest of them were only all right? I told her it was true and that I had not known about Biscuit, but I could see now that she was correct, and June nodded gravely, satisfied that I was a man who could be taught. Wheeze took longer. Wheeze watched me the way I'd have watched a stranger at his age, sidelong, ready to dislike me, half-hopping too. I did not push at him. I have broke enough horses to know that the surest way to lose a wary one is to chase it. I just worked, and I worked hard, and I let him see that I knew which end of a colt was which. And I did know. Whatever else those 10 hard years took from me, they had made me good at this one thing. By the end of the first week, I had the bays off hind sorted, a stone bruise gone deep, easy to miss, and had him sound and back under saddle. I started the dozen colts she hadn't had time for, gentle and slow, the old way, the way a Satali had taught me when I was younger than Wheeze. Standing in that round corral with a green colt's breath warm on my hands, the whole valley laid out gold in the evening, I would feel something come unclenched in my chest that had been a fist for 10 years, and then I would remember why I had no right to it, and clench it up again. In the evenings I mended fence. I rode the north line and found every place the wire was down and set new posts, working until I couldn't see my hands, and I will tell you it is a strange and humbling thing to dig a post hole in ground you had sworn never to set foot on again. The third evening Wheeze appeared at the wire without a word, took up the tamping bar and went to work beside me. We didn't talk. We just set posts until dark. When we walked back he said, not looking at me, "You really used to live here." I did. And you knew my grandpa. He had never met a Sa, of course. The grandfather was a story to him, a name on a stone. I did. He taught me near everything I know about a horse. He was the best man I ever rode for. It was the first easy true thing I had said out loud in a decade, and it surprised me how steady it came. We thought about that the rest of the way to the house. At the door he said, "He's up on the knoll with your brother." And then he went inside before I could answer, and I stood in the dark a while. I went up to the knoll the next morning before light. 2 stones, side by side, the lettering gone soft with 10 winters. ASATALLEY, Thomas KERR. Somebody kept the weeds off them. Marin, I knew it would be Marin, and there were dried wild blue larkspur laid at the base of each. The flower the ranch was named for, the flower that came up all over that knoll in June. I stood there a long time. I had imagined this place so many times that the real grass and the real cold stone seemed almost a lie. I tried to find words and there weren't any, so I just took off my hat and stood, and I let myself feel the whole weight of it for the first time without riding away. It near put me on my knees, but I stayed standing, because I had run from this exact spot once, and I had decided I was done running, even from the things that should knock a man down. When I came back down off the knoll, Marin was on the porch with coffee, watching me. She didn't say anything about where I'd been. She handed me a cup. We stood and watched the light come up over the ribbons, and neither of us spoke, and it was the closest thing to peace I'd had since I was 22, and we both knew it and neither of us would say it. Augustus Vane came calling that same week, and I learned the shape of the thing she was up against. He came in a buggy with a man on a horse beside it, a long, cold-eyed fellow with a tied-down gun who I made for the foreman, Cull Prout, before anybody said a name. Vane was a big soft man gone hard in the middle of his life, dressed townward, with the particular smile of a man who has never in 20 years heard the word no and expects he never will. He took off his hat to Marin, all courtesy, which was its own kind of insult, and made his offer, which he had clearly made before. A fair price, he called it. More than the place was worth, he called it, given the water situation, which he said as though the water situation were weather and not a thing he had made himself with a headgate and a hired crew. Marin heard him out. Then she said, "The Larkspur's not for sale, Mr. Vane. It wasn't last month and it isn't this one." "A woman alone," said Vane in a tone of great regret, "with 2 little children. The winters here are long, Miss Tolly. The work is hard. I only think of your comfort." "You think of my water," she said, "and of the 40 head your men ran off this spring, and you can keep thinking. The answer's the same." Vane's smile didn't move, but his eyes came off Marin and went to me, standing back by the barn, and I watched him take my measure and not like the arithmetic of it. "I don't believe I know your man," he said. "He's a hand," Marin said. "He breaks horses." "Is that all he breaks?" Prout, the foreman, said it soft from his horse, the way a man says a thing he's hopping you'll answer. I did not answer. I have learned that a quiet man worries that kind worse than a loud one. I just looked at Prout until he looked at his horse's ears, and then I went back to forking hay, and behind me I heard Vane gather his courtesy back up and make his goodbyes and drive off, and I knew we had bought ourselves trouble, because I had seen his face when he looked at me, and a man like Augustus Vane does not like a sum he can't do in his head. That night, after the children were asleep, Marin came out to the barn where I was oiling tack by lantern light. She stood in the door a while. "You didn't say anything," she said. "To Prout, he wanted you to." "I know it. I half expected you to." There was something working in her face. "The old Silas would have." "The old Silas got 2 good men killed," I said, "by riding off mad to prove something. I'm trying real hard not to be him." She came in and sat on a hay bale, which she had not done before, and was quiet, and then she said the thing she had clearly been carrying up to me all evening. "You should know what we're really up against, since you've put your neck in it. Vane's got the bank in Cedar Bow in his pocket. I'm carried on a note Pa borrowed against the place the year before he died to buy the breeding stock, and I've been paying it down a little at a time off the horse sales. The Army contract is the only thing that lets me make the payment that's due in 7 weeks. If those colts aren't ready and sold, I miss the note, and Vane's bank calls it. And he gets the Larkspur for the price of a debt instead of the price of a ranch. That's the squeeze. The water's just to make sure I can't run enough stock to ever get ahead of it. He's not in a hurry. He doesn't have to be. He's just waiting for me to drown." She said that last word and then heard herself say it, and we both went still, because of how Asa and Tom had died, and a thing passed between us in the lantern light that 10 years and all my cowardice hadn't quite been able to kill. "Then we get the colts ready," I said. "All of them. Ready and sold and the note paid, and Vane can wait till he's gray." "Oui," she said. "If you'll have the help." She looked at me a long while, and there was the whole ledger of it in her face, 10 years of it, and I held still and let her read me the way I'd let Wheeze read me. And at last she stood and brushed the hay off her skirt and said, "Be up before light. There's a lot of horse between here and 7 weeks." And she went into the house, and I sat in the barn with my heart going like a green colt's, ashamed of how much hope a man can feel and how little he deserves it. We worked, Lord, how we worked. I have done hard things in my life. I have moved cattle through country that wanted to kill us both, the cattle and me, and I have broke horses that 3 other men had given up for outlaws. But I have never worked the way we worked those weeks at the Larkspur. Up before light, the 2 of us in the corral with the lantern still lit, working colt after colt, trading off so the green ones never learned the bad habit of fear. We's turned out to have real hands for it, quiet hands, and I started letting him work the gentlest of the young ones on the line, and the pride that boy tried to hide when a colt followed him soft around the pen near broke my heart. June ran the water bucket and named every horse and reported to me daily on their characters. Marin and I learned to read each other in the corral without words, the way you do, a tilt of the head, a hand low, here, not yet now the way we had once when we were young before I threw it all in the creek. In the evenings I rode the line against Vane's men because they came. They never came at me direct. Prout was too smart for that, and so was Vane. They came at the edges. A gate left open in the night so the horses scattered to the hills, and a day lost rounding them up. A section of new fence cut clean, the wire rolled up neat and carried off so it looked like I'd never set it. A grass fire started up on the dry slope above the hay meadow one windy afternoon that we beat out with wet sacks and our own coats, Marin and Wheeze and me in a line of smoke and ash, June crying at the wagon, all of us black to the elbows by the time it was out. No proof of any of it, never any proof. Just the steady, patient pressure of a rich man's hand, pressing down on a woman to see when she would break. She did not break. That is the thing I want set down plain, because the story people tell about a place like that always makes the man the one who saves it, and it was not so. Marin Tawley did not need saving. She needed a second pair of hands and somebody to ride the line at night so she could sleep. And she had earned every inch of that ranch with 10 years of her own blood. And when I say we held the Larkspur, I mean we. And I mean she held it first and longest, and I was only allowed, late and undeserving, to help. The night it all came clear between us was a bad night, and a good one both. There'd been a hard rain up in the Ribbons, the first real storm of the season, and along about midnight Hatch Creek came up. Not like that night 10 years gone, nothing like it, just an ordinary high water, but I heard it rising in my sleep and I was out of the barn and pulling on my boots before I was rightly awake, because some sounds a man never stops listening for. I got the lower horses up out of the bottom and onto high ground, working in the dark and the rain, and when I'd got the last of them I turned and Marin was there beside me, soaked through, her hair down, having done the same from her end without a word passing between us, and we stood in the rain and the noise of the water and looked at each other. "It's all right," I said over the creek. "They're all up, it's just high water, it'll be down by morning." But she wasn't looking at the creek. She was looking at me, and her face had come open in a way I had not seen since we were young. All the hardness washed off it, and she said, "You came out of a dead sleep for the sound of the water." "I always do," I said. "Every creek I've slept by for 10 years, I wake up for it. I think I'll wake up for it till I die." And then it came out of me there in the rain, the thing I had never said to a living soul. How I'd been 11 miles off and dry that night, sulking, while the water took them. How I had known, the second I heard the next morning, that it was my doing, not the storm's mine, because I was supposed to be there, because a man stays, because Asa had said that very thing to me, and I'd ridden off to prove him wrong and proved him right in the worst way a man can. How I hadn't come to the buryings because I couldn't bear her face. How I'd made myself hard and fast and feared, because a man like that never has to stand still in a quiet room and feel what I'm feeling right now. How I had carried her letter 4 years unopened, because I couldn't stand to read what she'd think of me, and how it had finally worn to pieces in my bag, and I'd lost even that. I had never said any of it. I said all of it into the rain, because the water was up and the old terror was right there in my throat, and there was no more lying left in me. When I was done, she was quiet a long moment. The rain was easing. And then she said the thing that set me free, and it was not what I expected, because Marin Tawley never did the easy expected thing in her life. "I was so angry at you for 10 years, she said. "Not for riding off. Young men ride off for not coming back. I needed you and you weren't there, and then they were dead and you still weren't there, and I built this whole life out of being angry at you, Silas. It was good fuel. It got me through some cold years." She wiped the rain off her face. "But I'll tell you what I figured out, somewhere in there between burying my sister and raising her bobbies. I figured out that the flood was the flood. The dam went because the dam went. Pa went out because Pa would always go out for those mares, with you there or not, you know he would. And Tom went after Pa because Tom loved him and loved you, and that was the whole of who that boy was. You didn't do that. The water did that. You were a coward afterward, and that's a real sin, and it cost us both 10 years, and I'll be a while forgiving you the 10 years. But you didn't drown them. You couldn't have saved them. You just have been a third stone on that knoll, and I'd have grieved you too, and I am suddenly very tired of grieving you." The rain stopped. Off east the sky was going gray. Down below us the creek had already crested and started to fall, the way ordinary high water does, the way that one terrible night had not. I stood there and felt 10 years of stone come loose in my chest all at once, and I could not have said a word to save my life. "I'm not telling you it's mended," she said. "It isn't. There's the children to think of, and there's the ranch, and there's the fact that I don't half trust you not to bolt the first hard winter. You'll earn it slow if you mean to earn it. But I'm done being angry at you for the river, Silas. I gave that up some while back. I just hadn't had the chance to tell you to your face." I said her name. It was all I had. "Go to bed," she said, but she said it gentle, and she put her hand flat on my chest for one moment, over the place where the fist had been for 10 years, the way you'd quiet a horse, and then she went up to the house through the wet grass, and I stood in the gray light listening to the water fall and at last go quiet, and I understood that I had ridden home after all. We had 4 weeks to the army buyer and the note, and we used every hour of them, and Vane's pressure got worse the closer it came, because he could count 2 and he could see the colts coming along and the deadline coming with them. And a man like that does not enjoy watching a sum he meant to win start going the other way. It came to a head 3 nights before the army buyer was due. Prout and 3 of Vane's men came in the dark and opened the corral and ran off the whole green string, the 20-odd colts we'd worked all summer, the colts that were the note and the ranch and the whole fight, drove them off into the high broken country toward the ribbons where a horse could scatter and be a month in the finding, or never found at all. It was a smart and a low thing, and it near worked. By the time the dust woke me and I was horseback, the corral was empty, and the dark was full of the sound of hooves going up country. Now here is the place in the story where the old Silas Care, the hard, fast, feared one, would have done the thing the town was always braced for. I knew where Vane slept. I knew Prout's habits. I had spent 10 years becoming exactly the man who could ride into that and leave it quiet. And I sat my horse in that empty corral in the dark with the rage coming up in me like Hatch Creek over the banks, and I felt the whole pull of it, the easy, bloody arithmetic of it. And then I heard behind me the small voice of June, woke by the noise, standing in the house door in her nightgown, saying, "Mr. Silas, where are the horses going?" And I remembered what Marin had said the first day, before she'd let me sleep in her barn. "The day you raise your reputation at Augustus Vane like a gun, you're gone, because I will not have my children grow up in the middle of a killing." So I did not ride to Vane's. I rode up country after the horses, and Marin rode beside me, and we did the thing that was harder and slower and right. We tracked 20 head of scattered green colts through broken country in the dark and the dawn, and it was 3 days of brutal riding. The army buyer's day come and gone with us still out in the rocks gathering frightened young horses 1 and 2 at a time. And I will not pretend my heart didn't sink lower every hour, because the note was due and the buyer was gone, and it looked for all the world like Vane had won by simply making us too late. We brought the last of them down off the mountain on the morning the note came due, gaunt and filthy and saddle-galled, the both of us, with 22 head of horse strung out behind us, and the army buyer was standing in the Larkspur yard. He'd waited. Old Hetty Coyle had sent her grandson up the road to find him and told him the whole of it, that Vane's men had run off the stock, that the tawny woman and her hand were up in the rocks gathering them by hand, that any buyer with the sense God gave a goose would wait 1 more day for 24 colts started by Sela's care, whose horses, it turned out, had a name across 3 territories I hadn't even known traveled that far. The buyer had waited. He looked over the colts gaunt as they were and saw what was under the gauntness, and he bought the lot, every head, at a price that made Marin go still and quiet, and it was enough. It was the note and then some. Marin paid the note that same afternoon in Cedar Bow, in cash, in front of the banker who was in Vane's pocket, and made him write the paid receipt out twice so there'd be no mistake, and the whole town heard about it before sundown. Augustus Vane came out to the Larkspur one last time after that. He didn't bring Prout. He sat in his buggy and looked at the full corral and the singing ditch, for the high water had blown out his crank-down headgate up above, and the water was running free again, and nobody had to lift a hand to make it so. The country had just decided the matter on its own, and he looked at me standing by Marin on her own porch, and he understood that he had lost, not because he'd been outdrawn, but because he'd been outlasted, which a man like him never sees coming. "You're a fool to stay here, Care," he said. "A man of your talents." "I expect I am," I said. "I've been a fool a long time. I'm only now starting to be the right kind." He drove off. He sold out within the year as it happened and moved his money to where the holdouts were thinner. The valley breathed easier when he was gone, but that was later. That evening Marin and I stood at the corral fence in the long gold light and watched the colts we hadn't sold. She'd held back 4, the best of them, 2 for Wheeze and June to grow up on and 2 for breeding, having earned at last the room to keep something instead of selling everything to stay alive. June sat on the top rail nomming them. We stood between us, near as tall as Marin's shoulder now, the summer's work having stretched him, and he leaned, just slightly, into my side, the way a boy does when he's decided a thing without meaning to let on he's decided it. "You staying?" we said. It wasn't a question. He'd given up the safety of pretending it was. "If your aunt'll have me," I said. I'd like to stay and earn my place here a long time, slow." Marin didn't answer right off. She watched the colts. Then she reached over past Wheeze and took my hand on the top rail, rough as it was, and held it, and that was the whole of her answer, and it was more than I deserved and exactly enough. "It's a long fight ranching this country," she said. "Longer than any I've known. There'll be hard winters and dry years and notes to meet, and I'll need a man who stays, not a hero, a man who stays, through the high water and after." "I know what it costs to be the kind that doesn't," I said. "I paid it 10 years. I'd sooner be the kind that stays now the rest of it if you'll teach me how." We were married that fall on the knoll, up by the 2 stones, which Marin said was the right place because it was where everyone we loved could be at the wedding, the living and the dead both. The wild larkspur was long done by then, but Hetty Coyle brought asters, and June carried them, and we stood up beside me, and the small handful of the valley that had stepped off the boardwalk to let me pass that first afternoon came out and stood in the grass and let me back in, slow, the way you should let a hard man back in, with their eyes open. I am an old man now telling this, and the Larkspur is Wee's ranch these days, his and his children's, and June married a good fellow down the valley and has a brood of her own that calls me grandfather, though I've not a drop of blood in any of them, and I count that the finest thing I ever earned. Marin's been gone 3 winters. I still wake for the sound of high water. I expect I always will. But I don't wake afraid anymore, because I learned the lesson the river was trying to teach me all along, the one Asad Tawli tried to teach me the night I rode off too proud to hear it. It isn't being fast that makes a man. It isn't being feared. It isn't even being brave the way young men think of brave, which is mostly just being quick to die. What makes a man is being the one who stays. Who's there in the dry years and the hard winters and the high water both. Who comes home, even 10 years too late, even undeserving, and then never leaves again. I rode off once in shame, and it cost me near everything. I came home in shame too, but I stayed. And in the staying on that good ground under the ribbons with that hard, forgiving woman and those 2 borrowed children who became my whole heart, a coward at last learned to be a man. That's the only thing I've got worth handing down. Stay. Whatever it costs you, stay.